Welcome to Globewise Entertainment. The 1950s may seem like a golden age of Hollywood glamour, but behind the scenes, some films caused shockwaves that censors just couldn't ignore. In today's video, we're uncovering 13 controversial movies from the 1950s that were so provocative, so bold, or so politically charged, they were banned or heavily censored around the world. From hidden agendas to forbidden love and explosive ideas, these films crossed the line and made history. If you haven't subscribed to Globewise Entertainment yet, hit that subscribe button now for more untold Hollywood stories, banned classics, and cinematic secrets. And tell us in the comments, which of these films caught you by surprise? Or have you seen any of them? Let's get started. 1. The Moon is Blue, 1953. The word that shocked a nation. In 1953, The Moon is Blue wasn't just a romantic comedy. It was a revolution wrapped in charm. Directed by Otto Preminger, the film dared to do something unheard of at the time. It used words like virgin, pregnant, and seduce, all without the veil of innuendo Hollywood had relied on for decades. Because of this, the Motion Picture Production Code, also known as the Hays Code, refused to give it a seal of approval. That should have killed its release. But Preminger and United Artists did the unthinkable. They released it without the seal, igniting a national scandal. Cities like Boston and Kansas City outright banned it, religious groups protested, and critics cried foul over its immoral dialogue. But audiences? They packed the theaters. The controversy only fueled its success. It became a box office hit, proving that America was ready to challenge censorship and talk about real adult issues. The Moon is Blue didn't just stir up trouble. It helped break down the barriers that kept Hollywood from addressing sexuality with honesty. It's remembered today not just as a film, but as a cultural turning point. 2. Baby Doll, 1956. A sultry scandal that shook the South. In the deep American South, amidst the slow drawl of summer heat and swaying cotton fields, Baby Doll, 1956, ignited a firestorm that Hollywood never saw coming. Directed by the legendary Elia Kazan and written by Tennessee Williams, this provocative tale centered around a 19-year-old bride, Baby Doll Megan, played by Carol Baker, who sleeps in a crib and refuses to consummate her marriage to her much older husband. The storyline alone raised eyebrows, but it was the overt sexual tension, steamy innuendos, and unsettling imagery that made it a lightning rod for controversy. One infamous scene featured Baby Doll reclining in a nightgown, sucking her thumb, while seductively engaging in a cat-and-mouse game with a rival cotton gin owner. The Catholic Legion of Decency condemned the film outright, branding it grievously offensive to Christian and traditional standards of morality. Cinemas in the South refused to show it. Protesters picketed theaters. Even Time magazine called it the dirtiest American-made motion picture that had ever been legally exhibited. Despite the outrage, Baby Doll garnered critical acclaim and even received 4 Academy Award nominations, proving that controversy could go hand in hand with cinematic brilliance. But the scandal left a lasting mark. The film was banned or heavily censored in several regions, and Hollywood studios backed away from similarly provocative material for years. 3. The Wild One, 1953. When The Wild One hit the screens in 1953, it wasn't just a movie. It was a cultural explosion. Starring a young Marlon Brando in his breakthrough role, the film told the story of a leather-clad biker gang invading a small town and shaking up everything in their path. Brando's line, "What are you rebelling against?" with the cool reply, "What I got," became the anthem of teenage rebellion for an entire generation. But not everyone was thrilled. In the UK, the movie was banned for over 14 years. Censors feared it would incite youth violence and delinquency, worried that British teens would mimic the rebellious attitude and anti-authoritarian tone. In America, it faced similar heat. Critics called it morally irresponsible, and many theaters refused to screen it at all. Yet ironically, what censors tried to hide only made the film more legendary. The Wild One wasn't just banned, it was a statement. It challenged the buttoned-up image of the 1950s, portraying a raw, chaotic energy that the establishment simply wasn't ready to handle. Over time, it became a symbol of freedom, defiance, and the birth of counterculture. Today, it stands as a rebellious classic that dared to ask the question, what happens when youth fights back? 4. Laurand 1950. Too risque for post-war morals. Max Ophuls' Laurand is a visually stunning and artistically daring film, but in the 1950s, it stirred more outrage than admiration in many parts of the world. Based on Arthur Schnitzler's once-banned 1897 play, the film unfolds as a circular chain of romantic and sexual encounters across different social classes in Vienna. Each character passes their lover on to the next, exposing the hypocrisy, desire, and fragility of human connection. While Laurand is far from pornographic by today's standards, its themes of adultery, prostitution, and casual sex were deeply controversial at the time. In post-war America and England, where moral censorship was still strictly enforced, the film didn't stand a chance. U.S. censors labeled it immoral and outright banned it under the Motion Picture Production Code, refusing to grant it a seal of approval. Even the British Board of Film Censors initially rejected it for release, fearing it would corrupt public morals. But critics and cinephiles pushed back. Laurand was hailed in France and other parts of Europe as a masterpiece of cinematic form, a poetic, ironic commentary on love and desire. Eventually, as censorship laws began to soften, the film found its audience and legacy. Ironically, the very thing that got it banned, its unflinching look at human intimacy, also made it one of the most important films of its era. Today, Laurand is considered a classic of world cinema, but in the conservative climate of the 1950s, it was simply too provocative to handle. 5. Salt of the Earth, 1954. When Salt of the Earth hit production in 1954, it wasn't just making a movie, it was making history. Directed by Herbert J. Biberman, one of the Hollywood 10 blacklisted during the McCarthy era, the film was immediately branded dangerous by U.S. authorities, not because of violence or obscenity, but because of its politics. The story focused on a real-life strike by Mexican-American zinc miners in New Mexico, and it boldly tackled themes of labor rights, racial discrimination, and, shockingly for the time, women's equality. The film portrayed working-class immigrants as heroes, and even more radically, it gave strong narrative power to women, showing them leading the charge when the men were legally barred from striking. From the start, Salt of the Earth was met with fierce opposition. Hollywood refused to support the production. The FBI kept a close eye on it. The lead actress, Rosario Revueltas, was deported mid-shoot, and when it was finally completed, major theaters refused to screen it. Only a few independent cinemas dared to show it. For decades, the film remained in obscurity, censored, banned, and ignored. But over time it became a legend. Today, Salt of the Earth is hailed as one of the most important American films ever made. A defiant work of political art that stood tall in the face of censorship, surveillance, and silence. It wasn't just a film, it was a revolution on celluloid. 6. And God Created Woman, 1956. When And God Created Woman hit the screens in 1956, it wasn't just a movie, it was a cultural explosion. Set against the sun-drenched backdrop of the French Riviera, the film told the story of Juliette, a free-spirited, sensual orphan played by the then-unknown Brigitte Bardot. Her character wasn't just flirtatious, she was unapologetically sexual, defying every cinematic norm of the time. Directed by Bardot's husband, Roger Vadim, the film dared to portray female desire as something bold and natural. That was enough to send shockwaves through conservative societies. In America, the Catholic Legion of Decency condemned it outright, and several states refused to screen it. The UK heavily censored it, cutting scenes and blurring the line between art and indecency. But the controversy only fueled its fame. Bardot became an overnight icon, representing a new wave of liberated womanhood. And God Created Woman wasn't just banned, it was feared. Feared because it challenged the 1950s status quo, offering a woman who lived by her own rules, not society's. Today, it's seen as a landmark in sexual liberation on screen. But back then, it was the movie that made censors sweat and audiences whisper, and ultimately redefined what was possible in cinema. 7. Laventura, 1959. A scandal before its time. When Italian director Michelangelo Antonioni premiered Laventura in 1959, audiences weren't just confused, they were outraged. The film tells the story of a woman's mysterious disappearance during a yachting trip off the coast of Sicily. But instead of solving the mystery, the narrative drifts into a tangled emotional journey between the missing woman's best friend and her lover. There was no closure, no tidy resolution. Instead, viewers were left to sit with the discomfort of desire, alienation, and moral ambiguity. Its slow pacing, long silences, and daring themes of erotic obsession left traditional censors rattled. In some countries, including parts of the United States and Italy, Laventura faced immediate censorship for its bold sexuality and lack of moral clarity. Authorities feared it would undermine social values. Critics at Cannes initially booed the film, but days later, they awarded it the jury prize. What shocked censors most was how Laventura portrayed modern relationships: cold, disloyal, and emotionally disconnected. The film wasn't obscene in the traditional sense, but it dared to suggest that emotional emptiness was the real scandal. Eventually, Laventura was re-evaluated as a masterpiece of modern cinema. But in 1959, it was simply too provocative for the establishment to handle. 8. Flesh is Weak, 1957. Too real for the censors. Set in the shadows of post-war London, Flesh is Weak shocked audiences with its gritty portrayal of a young girl lured into prostitution by a manipulative older man. The film follows Lucille, a naive teenager who dreams of escaping poverty, only to fall under the charm of Tony Gianni, a smooth-talking predator who sees vulnerable women as tools for profit. What made Flesh is Weak so controversial wasn't just its subject matter. It was how unflinchingly honest it was about the exploitation of women in society. At a time when British cinema often romanticized urban life, this film peeled back the curtain to show the dangerous reality for many struggling women. Censors in both the UK and the US found the film too raw and provocative. It was banned in several regions and heavily edited elsewhere, with critics calling it immoral and unsuitable for public exhibition. But audiences and critics alike also praised its bravery, and some viewed it as a necessary wake-up call. Today, Flesh is Weak is remembered not just for its controversy, but for daring to tell the truth when silence was safer. 9. Les Amants, The Lovers, 1958. At first glance, Les Amants or The Lovers seemed like another French romance. A story of a wealthy woman trapped in a lifeless marriage, searching for emotional freedom. But director Louis Malle had something far more provocative in mind. Released in 1958, the film follows Jean, played by the radiant Jean Moreau, who is suffocating in a dull bourgeois life. Her cold, inattentive husband is more concerned with status than love. But everything changes when she meets Bernard, a younger, passionate stranger. In one whirlwind night, Jean experiences a level of intimacy that's raw, intense, and deeply human. What made Les Amants truly controversial wasn't just the affair. It was how it was shown. The film dared to portray female sexual desire in an honest, unapologetic way. There were no fades to black. No metaphors. Just raw sensuality and emotional vulnerability. In an era when women were expected to be passive, Jean's liberation was seen as radical, even dangerous. In the United States, the film sparked outrage. One theater manager in Ohio was arrested for obscenity after screening it. The case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, where the justices had to decide, was this art or pornography? In a landmark 1959 decision, the court ruled in favor of the film, stating it was not obscene and deserved protection under the First Amendment. It was a turning point for artistic freedom, and Les Amants became a symbol of the fight against censorship. More than just a love story, The Lovers challenged the world's assumptions about women, sexuality, and the role of cinema itself. 10. The Vanishing Prairie, 1954. At first glance, Walt Disney's The Vanishing Prairie seemed like a wholesome educational nature documentary, an ode to America's untamed heartland. But this cinematic tribute to wildlife unexpectedly found itself at the center of controversy. The film, directed by James Algar, was celebrated for its breathtaking footage of animals in their natural habitats. However, it was a brief but powerful birth scene of a buffalo calf that ignited outrage. In the 1950s, even the most natural depictions of childbirth were considered taboo in many conservative parts of the world. When the film reached New York State and several international markets, censors demanded the removal of the birthing sequence, deeming it too graphic and inappropriate for public viewing. Walt Disney himself was reportedly shocked by the backlash. To him, the scene was not offensive. It was a celebration of life, part of the natural cycle he sought to portray honestly. Yet despite Disney's defense, the film was either cut or outright banned in certain regions. Ironically, the controversy only heightened public interest. The Vanishing Prairie went on to win the 1955 Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature, and paved the way for Disney's later nature series, True Life Adventures. In trying to protect audiences from the reality of nature, the censors had only drawn more eyes to its raw, untamed beauty. 11. Rebel Without a Cause, 1955. When Rebel Without a Cause hit theaters in 1955, it wasn't just another teen drama. It was a cultural explosion. Starring James Dean in his most iconic role, the film dared to portray the angst, alienation, and rebellion simmering beneath the surface of post-war American youth. But not everyone was ready for that kind of honesty. Directed by Nicholas Ray, Rebel Without a Cause told the story of Jim Stark, a troubled teenager trying to fit into a world of broken families, violent cliques, and misunderstood emotions. Dean's electrifying performance struck a nerve with audiences, and a raw nerve with the authorities. The movie was banned or heavily censored in several countries, including New Zealand and Spain. Why? Officials claimed it glorified juvenile delinquency. They feared it would inspire rebellious behavior among teens and disrupt the fragile sense of order in conservative societies. Even in the U.S., it faced criticism from moral guardians and parents groups who saw it as a dangerous influence. But Rebel Without a Cause wasn't just about rebellion. It was about the desperate need for connection in a world that felt cold and rigid. Behind the leather jackets and switchblades was a powerful cry for understanding. Over the decades, the film transformed from controversial to classic. James Dean, who died tragically before the film's release, became a symbol of youthful resistance and emotional truth. And Rebel Without a Cause? It became a timeless reminder that sometimes, the loudest rebellion is the silent pain no one wants to talk about. 12. Victim, 1957 short censorship campaign before its 1961 release. Though officially released in 1961, Victim was first pitched in the late 1950s, and what followed was a quiet but fierce censorship storm. The film was groundbreaking, daring to center on the subject of homosexuality at a time when same-sex relationships were still criminalized in the UK. Starring Dirk Bogarde in a brave, career-defining role, the film portrayed a successful barrister who risks his career and social standing to expose a blackmail ring targeting gay men. That narrative alone was seen as too dangerous, too bold, and far too sympathetic for censors in both Britain and the US. Back in 1957, when screenwriter Janet Green and producer Michael Relf began work on Victim, they met heavy resistance. British film authorities warned that the topic was not suitable for public discussion, and the American Production Code flatly refused to approve the script. It took several years of persistence, rewriting, and negotiation before Victim finally saw the light of day in 1961. But make no mistake, the firestorm of moral panic and quiet censorship efforts in the late 50s laid the groundwork for what would become one of the most socially impactful films of its time. Victim helped shift public opinion, contributed to decriminalization debates, and is now seen as a pivotal film in LGBTQ+ cinema history. But its road to release began with hushed boardroom bans and institutional fear in the 1950s. 13. Kiss Me Deadly, 1955. A noir that dared to glare into the abyss. In the shadows of Cold War paranoia, one film dared to push the limits of fear, sex, and atomic destruction, and the censors weren't ready for it. When Kiss Me Deadly hit theaters in 1955, audiences were shaken. This wasn't your average detective noir. Directed by Robert Aldrich and based on Mickey Spillane's hard-boiled novel, the film reimagined Private Eye Mike Hammer as a cold, self-serving anti-hero in a world soaked with violence, corruption, and radioactive terror. From the opening scene, a screaming woman fleeing for her life on a dark highway, to the now iconic suitcase glowing with nuclear doom, the film was a nightmarish descent into post-war anxiety. It didn't just flirt with danger, it kissed it dead on. But the film's brutality and implied eroticism were too much for the guardians of decency at the time. The U.S. government reportedly stepped in due to its disturbing atomic subtext. The original ending, depicting a fiery apocalypse, was altered for initial release, cut short to imply the hero might have survived. In Britain, the British Board of Film Censors took issue with the film's sadistic violence and misogynistic undertones. It was heavily censored for UK audiences and banned entirely in several countries, deemed too nihilistic and politically unsettling. Today, Kiss Me Deadly is hailed as a masterpiece of film noir, a prophetic warning wrapped in pulp fiction. But in the 1950s it was too bold, too brutal, and too real for the world it reflected. And that wraps up our journey through 13 controversial films from the 1950s. Each one a bold statement that challenged the norms and rattled the censors of their time. Some were banned for politics, others for passion, but all of them made their mark on cinema history. Which one shocked you the most? Or do you think any of them were unfairly silenced? Let us know in the comments. We love hearing your take. If you haven't subscribed to Globewise Entertainment yet, now's the time. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell, so you never miss our deep dives into Hollywood's most daring stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next reel.